Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Allen. I'm with the Citizens Utility Board, and we're here tonight to talk about data centers and the Power Act, which is our version, the Clean Jobs Coalition's version of how to solve the problems that come along with data centers. And I will hand it over to my friend Samira.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. Samira Hanassian here, the Energy Programs Director for the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And I'm going to start by framing the issues at hand here. So um, the state of Illinois just passed the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act this past veto session. And that act really is the first step in ensuring that our grid can handle increased energy demand as we transition away from fossil fuels and bring more clean and renewable energy online. With that said, we're seeing exponential growth at not only a state level, but also a federal level with new data centers that Scott will speak to in a moment. But I want to make it very clear that the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act that just passed goes into effect this summer and truly is a solution ensuring that our local grid here in the state of Illinois can handle existing and anticipated energy demand as it stands as we make the transition to meet our clean energy goals. What it does not do, though, and the reason why we're here to talk to you, is to target regulations and create regulations for new large energy users that are coming online, which takes us beyond what we're prepared for. So I want to clarify that SERJA establishes a regular energy planning process, also referred to as an integrated resource plan, to ensure that every year we know as a state how much clean and renewable energy resources we need to bring online in order to meet our energy goals, as well as what the proper energy mix should look like for our grid as we make the transition away from fossil fuels. So with that, I'll pass it over to Scott.
So the map you see here pretty well illustrates the scale of threats that we're dealing with in 2026. Data centers in particular, the hyperscale data centers, grabbed the attention of people in the energy and utility world about 2 years ago. We knew then that disruptions, even just the threat of these data centers, that these data centers would cause, we're seeing those disruptions manifest, not just for Illinois, but for the regional electric grids that we're tied to. The potential for mass data center build out doesn't just threaten to raise our utility bills, it also is a threat to our water and our communities. But first, we want to focus on energy and utilities, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So there are two areas of concern for our utility bills when it comes to data center demand. First, the price of energy and the cost of capacity, which is capacity being our ability or the ability of our power plants to meet our demands for electricity, especially on days when peak demand is highest, like summer afternoons. The second area of concern is infrastructure costs. It's hard for us to imagine how much energy a data center needs to run around the clock. So a data center the size of the one just approved in Joliet would use as much energy as the city of St. Louis. So you can imagine now the infrastructure that you would need to build out to serve that one single customer that uses as much energy as a large city. It's staggering and it's incredibly expensive. Data center developers and their spokespeople like to tell us that they will cover all of the cost of this infrastructure, but that's not how utility regulation works in Illinois. And as it is now, utilities are required to recover those costs of building that infrastructure from all of their ratepayers. All of that utilities ratepayers are on the hook for those costs. On the other side of this, I think it's fair to ask, how is it the data centers are driving up our utility costs when so few of the larger ones are years away from being built? Well, we can point to capacity markets to answer this question. And like I said in the previous slide, capacity is a regional grid's ability to generate electricity anytime it's needed. So we pay power producers for the promise that they'll ramp up generation to meet our demand. What we're most concerned about is having enough of that capacity available when demand peaks. Plus, we want another 15 or 30% just to make sure that we have enough in case something catastrophic happens. So we see our highest peaks typically during the hottest afternoons and the evening hours, typically also during the summer. And the grid operator is calling for power plants to increase their output, run a little bit closer to their maximum capacity for an extended period of time, or in the worst cases, to turn on their most expensive, their really expensive assets like gas peaker plants. And so we've been in a period of mostly data center speculation for the last couple of years, where data centers are talking to several utilities within the same grid footprint. And those utilities are reporting to the grid operators how much load they would need to serve a particular data center. So the grid operator and the utilities know that a lot of these data centers that are being counted 3, 4, 5 times, but they don't have the luxury of guessing which loads might be real, which ones are going to show up and which ones aren't. And both the utility and the grid operator have to plan for the worst case scenario, which means telling their power generators who want to bid the plants that they own into this capacity auction that they might be called upon to serve a gigantic load, which means, again, running those very expensive plants more frequently and for longer periods of time, which means more money spent on fuel and water and labor and maintenance, etc. So, in other words, what we're paying for right now and likely to pay more for this summer is data center speculation. It'll get a lot worse when we start paying for the actual consequences of new data center load. And you don't have to take my word for it. You see on this slide that the independent market monitor for the PJM grid reports that load growth is due primarily to data centers. And while this is a major concern when it comes to data centers, there are a couple of other things that the Clean Jobs Coalition is considering, and Samir is going to talk about those.
So, taking all the information that Scott and I just shared, framing the issues at play, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition has come together, banded our expertise, and I come up with a slew of solutions, policy solutions to address these issues, really ensuring that we can establish nation-leading regulations for data centers here in the state of Illinois, beginning with um, strong climate and energy provisions. So in multiple modeling analyses conducted by ICJC partners, data center load growth not only results in Illinois failing to meet SEJA's landmark pollution goals, but also results in dramatic pollution increases from Illinois coal and gas plants. We're also concerned that about local air pollution and have heard local concerns around noise. So most data centers host twice as much diesel backup generation as their capacity, which typically means dozen and oftentimes hundreds of backup generators on site, exposing frontline communities to spikes in dangerous air pollution. And finally, water use. So hyperscale data centers can use between 1 to 5 million gallons of water per day, and a lack of transparency is threatening the sustainability of critical water resources. So the Illinois Power Act, House Bill 5513 and Senate Bill 4103 covers these issues through three main buckets: energy, community, and water. Under the energy provisions, the Power Act establishes policies that protect Illinois SEJA goals and ensures data centers not Illinois consumers should shoulder those costs. Under the community and frontline protection section, the Power Act establishes critical protections to ensure frontline communities are meaningfully protected, supported, and engaged in development decisions. And finally, the Power Act establishes transparent reporting and sustainable water use requirements to ensure that our water resources and consumers in Illinois are protected. And we will go into depth next through each of those buckets to discuss the various provisions, starting with energy. Scott, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, so a couple of slides ago, I mentioned that by and large, there are two cost drivers when it comes to data centers and electric bills that we're most concerned about: the capacity / energy and infrastructure. So on the infrastructure side, we're worried about the huge costs of bringing poles and wires and transformers and substations and all of that hardware to the data center, and that those costs are recovered from all of the utilities rate classes, from everybody in all of those rate classes. So what we propose is that the utilities introduce tariffs, and by tariffs, we don't mean import taxes. In utility regulation, a tariff governs how utilities charge customers in particular classes for service. And then those tariffs are approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission. So we propose that utilities create a special class only for data centers, and that the costs incurred by that class can only be recovered from that class. The other cost driver I mentioned was capacity and energy. So the effect of data centers using up a large amount of our power, squeezing the supply of that power, and making it more expensive. What we propose is based on the idea that a data center's top priorities are: one, being connected to a utilities grid as quickly as possible, and two, the assurance that they will have access to as much power as they need around the clock. So if we're right about that, we're giving data centers the option to bring or contract for new clean energy assets to cover their energy and capacity needs. So a data center would have to put together a plan showing the utility how they plan to make all of this power or cause this power to be built in order to get a fast track to utility interconnection. And the extent to which their power supply is firm and uninterruptible around the clock is proportional to the amount of new clean energy and capacity that they bring or cause to be brought. So for example, if a data center is only accounting for 40% of its needs with new clean energy and capacity, then their load can still be curtailed by 60%. So if we get into a situation where the grid operator or the utility has to shed load, or what we used to call brownouts, then that data center that only brought 40% of its needs still has a 60%, still 60% of its load can be curtailed. So all of that has to do with the investor-owned regulated utilities that most of us are familiar with, ComEd and Ameren. But on this next slide, we have in Illinois, we have 60 plus municipal and co-op utilities that are not regulated by the state. And so the solutions that I just talked about, those protections I just talked about, by default don't apply to those unregulated utilities. We're not proposing to regulate these utilities interconnection agreements, but we do want to ensure that, one, we don't create a situation where data centers perceive that it's too inconvenient to abide by the laws and regulations imposed on ComEd or Ameren. So instead, they take all of their business to a municipal or co-op utility. And two, we want to make sure that we're not ignoring the fact that data centers also pose a threat to ratepayers of those unregulated utilities. So what we propose is that each of those municipal and co-op utilities get their city councils or their co-op boards to approve tariffs or policies that guarantee the same kinds of cost protections that the Ameren or ComEd ratepayer can expect, and that those utilities don't make any interconnection agreements with the data center until either the utility or the data center can ensure that there's a plan to bring new clean energy and capacity online. And none of this would be subject to state approval, and it relies exclusively on local oversight, local control. So this is how we propose to deal with the energy and utility related problems that data centers are likely to cause. And I'll turn it back to Samira to cover the other two categories of community and water protections.
Yeah, so looking at the Power Act's provisions for communities, local communities, we're really talking about frontline communities where data centers are, data center developments are being proposed and built, as well as particularly in environmental justice communities across the state that are disproportionately burdened by both high energy and also high polluting industries. So one aspect here, I had mentioned a concern around backup diesel generators, often used by data centers. We want to ensure that we're closing the 24-hour free pass that data centers currently have without regulations around their backup generation use, and want to ensure that they can only run their backup generators under emergency circumstances for a defined short period of time. It's about 3 hours max consecutively. And this ensures that we're providing a cap on air pollution as well. So really, really critical addition to the Tier 4 policy in place already at the state level and regulations. Next is around cumulative impact assessments for environmental justice communities. So this is a twofold provision stipulating that a new data center development can not be built within a 3-mile radius of an environmental justice community unless the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency determines through a cumulative impact assessment that a new data center development can do no further harm by coming into that community and being developed. This is a really important distinction. So we are both providing safeguards against a data center just being able to pop up in an EJ community, which without these stipulations and rules, if a local municipality doesn't have really strong zoning rules, could happen. And this is where we end up hearing about community members and residents hearing about a project after the fact and not being brought along during a planning process or proposal. Next, transparent public engagement and community benefits, ensuring that there is a community benefits agreement in place for local residents engaging in a data center development before it's been approved. This is really critical, ensuring that one, data center developers are not engaging in non-disclosure agreements, which has been happening and creates a behind the curtain closed door situation that creates further confusion and complications for us to be able to further regulate these sites, because we don't know what's happening, what their energy and water use is, et cetera. It also ensures that the community has a voice and a seat at the table as a data center development is going through its approvals and permitting processes. Next, around hyperscale data center public benefits and affordability fund, we're really excited about this piece. All data centers would have to pay annually into a restricted fund to support low-income bill assistance and home weatherization programs, as well as environmental justice programs. So one example would be LIHEAP. And this is really important in highlighting that we want data centers to be good neighbors and community actors, and not just pulling resources and but also contributing back, both through financial resources and also other economic resources as well. Next, we want to talk about the water provisions of the Power Act. You've been hearing over and over again throughout this presentation the lack of transparency that exists with data centers. Water is a really big area in this case where we want to ensure that data centers have to report on their water use, as well as where they are siphoning water from, and then what is happening to that water as they are using it. Is it closed loop? Are they expelling it back into our waterways? What is that quality? We don't have that information currently for projects. So the Power Act would demand that they develop water resources plans and water usage reporting. We also want to know through those reporting mechanisms and plans what the cooling water use efficiency would look like, considering water is primarily used to cool data center operations. There is a really high energy use and cost associated with water use, with that cooling practice. And so really important to hone in on what efficiency measures a data center site is planning to employ. One really great example is a closed loop system where water is coming in, it stays in that system, it's self-circulating and not getting expelled out. To further drive the point home around transparency, water impact reports would be publicly available through an online dashboard. The Illinois State Water Survey would use a data center's plan to model and report on anticipated impacts to shared water resources. So again, this would be available through an online dashboard, available to the general public, and updated as a data center development plan or report is published. Finally, we have an IEPA water impact permit. So this new rulemaking would empower the IEPA to use all of the information I just mentioned to make an adverse resource impact determination, require water efficiency measures, and ensure data centers pay for their costs. So again, ensuring that whatever water resources data centers are employing, that they are not passing those costs to other consumers, everyday residents in a community also connected to those utilities. So this summarizes the different provisions in the Power Act. We never wrap up a presentation without directing folks to take action. So it's really important that as a next step, you talk to your local elected officials, your state local officials, and ask them to support the Power Act. You can show up to Lobby Day on April 8th. There will be another Lobby Day on May 30th. And it's really important to come out and be vocal about these provisions and what you want to see through sound data center regulations.
Well, thank you everybody for joining me and Samira here today. And if you want to learn more about this bill or what we at the Clean Jobs Coalition do, we have a website. It's illinoiscleanjobs.org. And there is a section on that website under the ICJC platform, and you can see the Power Act. So it kind of sums up what Samir and I just talked about. There are also links to a really helpful fact sheet. And of course, you read around that website, you can make sure to keep up on everything that we're up to, including those lobby days that Samir mentioned. But thank you all for listening, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help.